Hello, in today's Exploring Rust we're going to take a look at enums and options. Unfortunately for me this raises more questions than it answers, but the answers seem to be in the following sections of the Rust documentation, so I suppose we'll resolve them in the next video maybe. So enums in Rust look pretty simple. We've got an enum keyword, we've got curly brackets. They do have names, so I should give this a name. Let's call this star type. And then in here I can list a bunch of different options. So if you've been programming in almost any language, then you will know what an enum is, I think, an enumerated type. Let's have in here red dwarf, yellow dwarf, and red giant. Those are just about all the types of stars that I know. That should be dwarf. I think that's correct. Let's just try compiling it. I'll do cargo format and cargo run. Yeah, it's just telling me that I'm not using that, which is fair enough. And apparently you can assign values to these. I'm not sure if they have to be consecutive and if you have to assign values to all of them if you do it to one. Let's just try. Yeah, that seemed to compile, so that should be fine. What if I wanted to give these different values? Let's try this. So if I run that, yeah, that seems fine as well. Okay, so you can give them values. They don't have to be consecutive, but you don't have to. So then I could create variables from this enum. So let type, which is going to be of type star type, equal star type colon red giant, for example. Whether we can print this out or not, I'm not quite sure. Let's attempt to print it and see what happens. So in the double quotes, I'm going to put curly brackets, and type is a really bad name for a variable. Let's call this just star maybe. So star, and I'll try the question mark and we'll see if that works. Okay, it is going to work as long as I put this stuff there. I'm going to type this out because I really should try to memorize it. We've got a hash, square brackets. I think then we had derive, lowercase d, maybe. And was it debug in there? Let's see. I got it mostly right. We've got to have a capital D there. All right. So now I should be able to print this. Let's try. Yep, and it says red giant down there. Run the formatter again just to be doubly sure. I'm going to make this a bit smaller. So let's create a more complex enum. We'll have enum. I don't want to call it astronomical entity. That's going to be too long. I'll just call it entity. And let's say we'll have two kinds of entities. So a star, and we'll also have a planet. Now you're allowed to supply different bits of data for each of these, which again is not unfamiliar from other programming languages. Although to be honest, I don't often use this feature. I probably underuse it in other languages. So for a star, for example, maybe we want to specify the name, which could be a string, and we want to specify probably the star type. So I can use that other enum I've got in there to specify the type of it. And you can also use struct types in there, for example. For a planet, let's say the data we've got is, well, let's just have name for a planet. You could put whatever you like, whatever data types you want for every enum value in here. So now I should be able to create some kind of entity. Let sun of type entity equal, so that's going to be entity and star, and then I've got to fill in some values here, I think. Let's call this the sun, and the type of it, that can be star type. I believe it's a yellow dwarf. So now if I put that debug stuff here, we probably should be able to print that. Let's write hash, square brackets, derive, round brackets, debug with a capital D. And I'm going to try printing it. Println, exclamation mark, and in there we've got sun and a question mark. Let's see. Well, the formatter actually complains here. Ah, yeah. I should have used 2 colons there. I do know that. That's just a mistake. All right, try it again. Formatter and run. Oh, what did I do wrong here? Yeah. Now this is something that really annoys me. I've got to type string colon colon from apparently almost every time I want a string. Okay, I suppose that's ultra safe or something, but let's try that again then. Okay, now it works, and we've got red giant and star printed down there. Let's just clear that terminal. Wow, it's got a lot of warnings coming out here. So it's saying something about debug, but oh yeah, that's just a note on this error. It's saying planet is never constructed. Well, that's true. I'm not using that. That's absolutely true. And it's got the same warnings on my star types here. It's also got, oh yeah, that's from earlier on, I think. So let's just create a load of blank lines, then clear it and run it again so I can see where the error actually starts. Well, not the error, but the warnings. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here. Okay, I've got a huge font, but I think this PowerShell shell doesn't actually preserve my blank lines, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, as far as I can see, all the current warnings, okay, they start there, and they're all just about not constructing things. I probably should look into how to suppress these warnings a little bit, because I can't really handle that many warnings. But this did work, and it did print star, the sun, yellow dwarf, and earlier on we printed red giant as well. So I suppose we can then use these, well, we can certainly use these enum types as function arguments, and I suppose we can check if a particular thing is equal to a particular enum type or not. And I imagine we should also be able to get different fields out of an enum in some form. Now the problem is, doing all of those things, as far as I can see, is immensely complicated. The Rust documentation at this point doesn't mention how to do things like checking if a particular enum is equal to a particular other enum. It doesn't tell me how I would get the name from an instance of an enum, like how I would get this string that I've defined there. It doesn't say how to do that. And when I Google how to do it, I get a load of examples that seem to be just really complicated. I mean, really complicated. I just don't understand what's going on with them. I think this is at least partially, if not entirely, covered in the next section of the Rust documentation. So I'll probably get onto it in the next video. Meanwhile, let's take a look at a particular kind of enum. So there's this thing apparently called the Rust prelude, and that means a load of stuff that is imported into every program automatically without you having to specify any kind of import statement. And among the things that are imported into the prelude or by the prelude or whatever is an option type, which is a kind of enum. An option has the values some and none. Apparently Rust has no null pointers. You can't set things to null or void or whatever. Instead it has this option type. And again, it's all about safety, because apparently people assuming values actually refer to something when they're actually referring to null causes a lot of bugs. So fair enough. Let's take a look at what this particular page of the Rust documentation actually tells us. So I can define an option like this. Let's say let value of type option equal sum, and we can pass like a value in there. And the option here would be optional. So I don't know if I could actually print that. Probably not. Let's just try it, because I'm curious what happens. If I try to print value here, what's actually going to happen? Oh, it does actually print. It says sum 99, so that's okay. So this guarantees that value does actually refer to a valid value. We've said it's equal to something. It's not going to be unset or referring to null or something. On the other hand, if I actually want to get this value out, it seems to be surprisingly complicated. I thought maybe there'd be a method called get or getInt or something like that. That doesn't seem to be the case. All the examples I can find of getting values out of here are pretty complicated. So I suppose we're going to probably cover that next time. Another thing we can do is we could say I'll just use value again and set it equal to none, which is the other enumerated constant, or whatever you call it, the other enum value in option. Does this actually compile and run? It doesn't. So the difficulty here is that because I've set this to none, Rust doesn't know what type of thing I want it to be. So I might reassign it to something later that isn't none, otherwise what would the use of it be? But at this point, we have to tell Rust what the type of it is. So let's put a colon in here, and I'm going to type option. And we use the diamond bracket syntax that's common to Java and C++ to specify the type of this thing. So let's say that this is going to be now of type string, since I've completely redefined it, and this is a different variable to this altogether. And I probably want to make this mutable so that I can reassign it. Now later on, I could do something like value equals string : from greeting, and that ought to work. And we could probably even print it. Let's try that. So if I go to a terminal and try this out, okay, it doesn't like that. I'm going to make this terminal smaller. So it's telling me, okay, I've got this let mut value option of a string, and it expected option string and found string. Oh yes, that is true. So this should be now an option, of course. So let's wrap it in sum, which I believe will fix the issue. All right, let's try that. Yeah, now it works, and down here it's printing sum greeting. So once again, since I don't actually know how to get values out of enums, at this point I've now exhausted my knowledge of enums. But we're going to look at this stuff in the next video, I think. The next page in the documentation, I think, covers something called match and possibly some interesting use of let. So we're probably going to answer those questions in the next video. Sometimes with the Rust documentation, I have to say I get the feeling that the person writing it is just getting carried away with their enthusiasm. They're explaining a load of stuff that often isn't really central to what they're talking about. It is relevant, but pretty much any programmer could happily skip it. And I think that's probably just a reflection of how enthusiastic some people are about Rust. So what I've gone through here is kind of a condensed version of that whole page. Okay, so that's it for this video. Until next time, happy coding.